Hi, welcome back, everybody. It's the Denver Dzogchen podcast. I am here once again with Joe Wagner. And the reason we've been gone for a while is because Joe was in Nepal for quite a while. And so we're just getting our feet back. And so, what better discussion to have than Nepal itself? Joe's been there many times, and I know that he has lots of great stories from Nepal. So, welcome back, Joe. And tell us a little bit about your trip and other things that have happened in that magical country.
Hello, Damien. Hello, everyone. Thank you for listening, tuning in for this. Happy to talk about Nepal, a place that's played an important role in my development over many, many years. Yeah, I love that place. It's a special place.
It's kind of like the last vestige of a Vajrayana country, really, right?
Well, in terms of Vajrayana countries, probably Bhutan is the ultimate place right now because it has a real Vajrayana loving king. I was in Bhutan for a conference almost 2 years ago, and during that time, it dawned on me that the king right now is sort of like King Trisong Detsen. He's sort of supporting the Dharma in the last remaining Himalayan kingdom. There used to be Sikkim and Nongchen and a whole bunch of them, and unfortunately, they're all gone except for Bhutan. So I guess as a Vajrayana country, Bhutan is the ultimate place. But Bhutan is difficult to visit, almost impossible to stay a long time in. And because of what's required, I think, to keep the country operating in light of the fact that on one side they've got China, on the other side India, and the complications of modern political world, it's a little bit more strict, maybe, than a true Vajrayana country would be. I was talking with someone who's very familiar with a Vajrayana practitioner, a Tantric practitioner, and this guy said that there are only two real Tantric places left in the world. One is Varanasi in India, and the other is Kathmandu. And although I've spent some time in Varanasi, not being a Hindu Tantrika, I'm not as familiar, but Kathmandu is still the tantric center of the world. In fact, I personally think, as far as Vajrayana goes, it's the center of the Vajrayana world right now. So yeah, I was just there and had another amazing, crazy time.
Mm. So I know things can be a little wild there. Maybe you can tell me a little bit about the craziness that can happen in Nepal.
Like all places in the world, and during my life, I first was in Nepal it wasn't that early. It was in 1993. But at that time, there were a lot more tantric teachers alive. There are all the old timers. Many of the old timers were still around. Tulku was there, and Chogi Trichin Rinpoche, and a whole bunch of great masters were still with us. They've almost all passed, and so things have changed a little bit. And simultaneously, along with other kind of wild or quote unquote wild places, like Bangkok or whatever, the governments have gotten more together and things have become more modern. So 30 years has changed things. But Kathmandu is still a very, very special place, a truly blessed place. The neat thing about the Kathmandu Valley is, according to the tantras and to the ancient stories, it was a mandala even before humans were there. It was supposedly a giant lake. It's encircled by ranges of mountains, and at one point it was a giant lake, and at that point the Bodhisattva Manjushri took his flaming sword and cut a slice in the edge of that mountain, and the water drained out, and that is what formed the Kathmandu Valley. And you can even visit that place. I visited it when I was there just recently. That gorge is supposedly what was caused by Manjushri. So the very essence of the place, it has this tantric kind of energy to it. I will put a plug in there for an old documentary about Kathmandu. I can't think of the name of it, but it was made I think in the 80s, and it really discusses this very nicely. If I can come up with it, I'll put it in the notes to this
Mhm.
episode. But it gives you a feeling for how it was, say 50 years ago when things were much more wild. Now they've settled down, and I was surprised this time that they actually have maybe more than one, but I visited an actual mall in Kathmandu, something I thought was probably impossible, but It's becoming more modern. I would say it's almost, some parts of town are no longer really third world. It really has a second world feeling, more like Thailand, or a place where things are running a lot more smoothly. But directly beneath the surface, there's still quite a good tantric feeling about the place, especially in the little neighborhood of Boudhanath around the big stupa that was supposedly built by Guru Padmasambhava in a previous life.
Yeah, maybe you could tell us a little bit about that. That it seems that the Boudhanath Stupa is kind of what's holding the energy of that place together in so many ways, and is probably playing an important energetic function on the whole planet. Um, Maybe you can say a little bit about that stupa and how special.
Certainly, I certainly agree with you. There are a whole bunch of stupas. We could have a whole discussion sometime about the stupas of Kathmandu, of which I'm not an expert, but I did see there are several books just detailing all the different stupas in the valley. There's some, there's the huge ones like Boudhanath and then Swayambhunath. Uh, and Swayambhunath especially figures into so many histories. You read the history of I'm trying to think of, like, Buddhaguptanatha, the teacher of Taranatha, and he spent quite a bit of time at Swayambhu. It's been playing a role for a long, long time. So same with Bodha. Uh, the basic history, which I'm not an expert on, but there is a book by Keith Dowman called The Great Stupa, I think, and it's got the history of the Boudhanath Stupa according to the Tibetans. Jarong Kashor is the name according to the Tibetans, but it is a great big mound-like stupa, kind of this kind. Hold on, I can show you. I happen to have a little model of the Bodha Stupa, so I'll show it in the hopes that the people who see this, who haven't been there, can connect with it. So it looks sort of like this, actually very much like this. And it's built on a series of levels. You can see from the top. It in itself, stupas are mandalas. And it's been recently rebuilt and reconsecrated by one of my teachers, Tulku Pema, was able to refill that after the catastrophic earthquake. It got very damaged, and so they took out all the relics, recataloged them. He added things, and they established it as stupa, and then reconsecrated it also. So anyway, the stupa is very large. I don't know the exact dimensions, but it must be 70 or 80 yards in diameter, something like that. And it serves as the locus of Tibetan activity in the valley. There are a lot of monasteries over by Swayambhu, but the real essence of the Dharma, so to speak, is happening at Bodha. And that happened because in the early 70s, I think starting with Tulku Rinpoche, he built a stupa there a monastery called Kaning Shedrup Ling, which was the abbot of that monastery is Chokanima Rinpoche, who many of our listeners will be familiar with, the eldest son of Tulku Urgyen, and he's been the abbot there since it was consecrated. It was consecrated by the 16th Karmapa, one of the teachers of Tulku Urgyen, and also, I guess, one of the students. So when they built that monastery, it started in before that, it was just fields around there. There were some few shops and just some Tibetans living there that had come after the diaspora, but it was that building of that monastery and all the monasteries like Sechen, Gompa, and so forth, like Dilgo Khyentse built Sechen, that caused that place to be, in the world of Vajrayana, maybe like the main place. And those monasteries have come up with Shedras, monastic universities, and the one that is at Kaning Shedrup Ling, Chokanima's monastery, is really a Westerner training place, and they have scholars from all over the world there teaching Buddhism and Sanskrit and Tibetan, and it's producing very consistent groups of solid translators, people who go on to teach at universities around the world and so forth. So now it's got a lot of sort of Western energy there too. But for many, many years, it's been sort of the place to see lamas, to receive teachings, and twice a day, the Tibetans and many Westerners and Nepalis too, who practice Buddhism, come and make circumambulations around the stupa every day. And it's got an incredible vibratory feeling. That place is on fire. And I was quite impressed this time, once again, after many, many visits, but it's truly a wonderful place.
Yeah. And I remember you saying something that there were a few things you experienced this trip that made you realize that Buddhism and the Dharma is still alive and well. Maybe you can
Hmm.
share a little bit
Yeah,
about
I had maybe three different. Well, of course, that any listener of ours would say, like, wow, yeah, of course, the Dalai Lama is alive. Great masters like Arjuna Rinpoche are alive. That a lot of people practicing. And although Tibetan Buddhism seems to have fallen off of the public stage in some ways in the last 5 or 8 years or something, it's still very strong. I didn't mean to imply that I was worried that Dharma was ending. It's not like that, but compared to when I first started to go there in the early 90s, many of the Tibetan trained 25 plus years in retreat masters have passed away. And it's now a new group. So I had a couple of experiences that made me feel that there's nothing to be sad about. It is just as strong as it was. When I was in Kathmandu last year for the cremation of Tulku Rinpoche's second son, the reincarnation of Chogyur Lingpa. He had passed, and they had a massive cremation ceremony for him. Thousands of people and tons of lamas. It was amazing. And during that time, I noticed that I don't know what caused it, but there quite a bit of growth in Kathmandu. Not just more people, but more modernization and taller buildings and so forth. And this time, when I went back, it was even stronger. In fact, incredible experience for someone who has been going to Kathmandu for a long time. I got in a taxi at the airport and explained where I wanted to go, and the guy said, why don't you just put the name here? And he had a touch screen in his taxi, something almost impossible to imagine even a year ago for me. uh, and so I typed it in there, and we zoomed off toward Boda, and of course, totally wrong place. They dropped me off at, but the idea was there, and there was a lot of that kind of stuff. The mall I mentioned, and people a lot more. I should say, not more Western dressed, but less traditional dresses. A lot less Punjabi suits, a lot less saris on the street. People really look Western, more like India now, and my experience of India in recent years anyway. And I got a feeling from even just heading toward Boda, which is only, takes 20 minutes, but it's only about 3/4 of a mile or something from the airport, uh, that things were really changing. And I sort of felt like, oh my gosh, are the blessings still going to be present? Well, yes, I can say for sure they are. In fact, it it seemed to me, and this is just Joe's opinion, right? But a guy who's reasonably familiar with Nepal and especially with Kathmandu over a long period, and certainly I love Nepal. That's something without a doubt. It occurred to me this time and seemed to really be energetically present that it doesn't matter what happens. It can become completely modernized. A place like Thailand, which over the last 30 years has become, in some ways fancier than many cities in the United States, much more modern, and you can really forget you're in a place that just a little while ago people went around with bare feet. It's like very different in Thailand. Even if that same thing happens to Kathmandu, and all the traditional things we think of, like three-wheeled rickshaws and all this stuff, which I hardly saw any of, uh, even if all that goes away and no more cows in the streets and no more any of that stuff, the energy of the blessings of the Buddhas will still be present. And whether that is because of these amazing stupas or because of something in the land, it's hard to say, but it really felt to me, and I'm not the biggest woo-woo guy, as you know. I'm not Mr. Vibes and energy stuff, but it really felt like the stupa was just going whoa, whoa, whoa the whole time I was there. It was wonderful, actually, and it triggers something in someone who has even a modicum of faith like I do, that we can do this. Things are alive. And I really got that feeling several times late night going around the stupa when there aren't very many people or nobody. Late night, by the way, is still only like 9:15. Everything is shut down, but making some circumambulations very late a few nights, I really could feel it. And then if you go a little earlier, when there are so many, hundreds or maybe 1,000 people cruising around the stupa, and it's a little bit of a tourist place, so people come from what I appeared to be India, and all over Asia to visit this place, and everybody's lighting butter lamps and everybody's going around with their mullah and people doing chud, and it's just cool, it's still got that vibe. But I'll tell you one interesting thing that happened. I had the good fortune of spending a couple of days with Father Francis Tiso, who is a Catholic priest in Italy. He's American, but he has a parish in Italy, and he and I have been friends for a long time. And some of our listeners will know him because he translated several very rare biographies of Milarepa, early biographies. He's an expert on Milarepa. He has a PhD from Columbia in Buddhist studies. He's an expert at about 500 things. He's one of those people that makes you feel like, what have I been doing with my time? It's like 5 people in one. Anyway, he was very kindly invited me to stay with him in his apartment that he was renting. And one night after we had dinner, we were going around the stupa, and all of a sudden, the atmosphere was pervaded by the smell of some kind of flower. Like it smelled like jasmine. And there's a lot of artificial jasmine out there. This was not that. This is just like being in a jasmine grove in Southeast Asia, I had never smelled anything like that in Kathmandu, especially Bodha's in the middle of a huge city. There's 2 million people there now, I heard. A lot of pollution, and it's still quite filthy and stuff. Anyway, it was so strong and so pervasive and lasted for 2 or 3 circumambulations, which take, maybe 8 minutes to go around this stupa. So quite a while. And I turned to Father Tiso and I said, "Can you smell it?" He said, "Yeah, it's the blessings." And I was like, "Oh my gosh, so cool." It just made me feel like there's something about the resonance of the place, the atmosphere, the fact that Buddha was born in Nepal, all these stupas. There are thousands of stupas in the valley, and you go around and people are making offerings every day to those stupas. There's an interesting tantric mixture of people. Not everyone's Buddhist, obviously. Most people identify as Hindu, but they still have a tremendous faith in the Buddha. And so there's people make offerings to these stupas, even these little black stupas, which are everywhere, every day, and much less the large stupas where people are constantly prostrating and accumulating their nundra and stuff. So the vibe of the stupa is still strong. I had that interesting experience with the smell. I don't know where it came from. I couldn't see there were no flowers. They must have been those celestial flowers. It was very cool. And then I had one other experience, which I can tell you about, but I feel like I'm running my mouth. So please go ahead if I have something.
No, this is the story I'm waiting for. This is the really good one. So keep going.
Well, it was very cool. Yeah. And I know I shared it with you, but I'm happy to share it with the others. There's something about, and it could be me, but it's so common. You talk to people who've spent time in Nepal, and everybody's got cool stories about connections made, and just it feels like someone is directing you on some level. Something is guiding your steps sometimes. Not all the time, but I was not there a very long time this time. So I had a lot of energy. I was really excited, and so forth. So maybe it caught me more, but I have to backtrack to make the story make sense. A few months ago, another friend of mine in Australia had hosted a Lama who I had never met, but I had read a book by him. And that's this Tulku Pema Rigtsal Rinpoche, who is a student of Dilgo Khyentse and many other great masters, Dunjum Rinpoche. He's a lineage holder of the Longchen Intik and also of the Dunjum Tersar. And my friend in Australia had hosted him, and he was coming to Colorado at the request of the CEO or owner, maybe, of Shambhala Publications, a fellow I don't know very well. But anyway, Rinpoche was staying at his house. So my friend in Australia put me in touch with Rinpoche's translator, who was traveling with him, and we exchanged messages about me meeting Rinpoche. And because I was friends with David in Australia, they made it, they arranged it. And so I had an opportunity to meet him, which was not a long meeting. I got a teaching with other people and had 45 minutes with him or something. Very impressive, amazing Lama. He's about 60, early 60s, and really cool. And he lives in Humla. He is all about meditation. So, he just stays in retreat and teaches the people who are there. And then, of course, they do pujas and stuff. But Humla is up near Dolpo, near the Chinese border. And the old Tibetan border, and is very remote. I mean, it's 2 plane rides and then at least a 3 or 4 hour Jeep ride, and that is the road was just completed, I think, last year. So it used to be you had to hike 2 weeks after multiple plane rides. I haven't been there myself. Anyway, so I had this small but noticeable connection with Tulku Pema Rigtsal. So I go to Kathmandu, and I knew that his translator was there because I had arranged to meet with her just to hang out a little bit, and I can have her translate for another teacher of mine. My Tibetan is terrible, so she was very kind to do that, or be willing to do that. So we arranged a time and so forth. And then one day, very early in the trip, Father Tiso and I went into town to visit the famous Vajra Books, which has to be the best Vajrayana bookstore in the world. The fellow who owns it publishes a lot of unusual titles and has a huge collection on two stories. Really cool place, Vajra Books, if you're ever there. So we were in Vajra Books, so Father Tiso could pick some things up he had put on hold, and we went upstairs they have another level full of books, and up there we ran into 2 young Australians, and they started to talk about what they were doing there, and where were they, of course, on their way to, but Humla, to see Tulku Pema Rigtsal, who they had met in Australia. So, of course, they knew my friend in Australia, they knew the translator, and they said, yeah, Laura was supposed to meet with us, but she had to cancel because she had to translate for someone. And I was like, that's me. It was just like connecting like this. Of all the places and all the people, it was very interesting. So same friend, David in Australia, put me in touch with a student of Tulku Pema Rigtsal, who lives in Boda, and had lived at the monastery for a long time, and now had returned to lay life and was married, and he and his wife have a little shop there. So I contacted him. I went and met him, and he told me a very interesting story. He said that he had fairly recently gone up to Humla and spent a few months receiving teachings from the Tulku. The Tulku had put word out that he was going to teach the entire path, everything from the preliminaries all the way to the advanced Dzogchen practices. And everyone would be invited to the beginning, and then depending upon how much practice you had done and what your commitments were and stuff, you could go to further things. So he told me the whole story, which I'm happy to share if we have time. Do we have time?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. So the Lama Pema, went up there, and I think it was only Tibetans and other Himalayan people who had come from as far away as Ladakh, which is about, I don't know, maybe 1,200 miles far. And Rinpoche taught the outer preliminaries. He taught the Nundro. Everybody practiced the Nundro, each section as he taught it. And then for those who were willing to commit to do whatever was required, I'm not sure, he taught the famous Dunjum Chud, which is a beautiful chud, one of the 2 really famous chuds. And he would teach during the day, and at night, everyone had to go out. And the Lama said, everyone had to go down into the jungle, which, because just below where the monastery is, it becomes real, jungle. And they had to all go individually, and then they all practiced the chud at night in the jungle. And everyone had to memorize the text because there are no lights allowed, and totally in the traditional way, which really almost brought tears to my eyes. I was so psyched. And he said there had to be close to 100 people. He said there were, like 400 or 500 for the main teachings, but then people stuck around. There were maybe 100 or 200 doing the chud. So can you imagine, in the middle of the night, in the middle of nowhere, way up there, right by the Tibetan border, the sound of the chud drum in the jungle? I just thought it sounded so cool. So that went on for whatever he taught it, 2 weeks or something. And when that was over, then it became a lot more strict. And you had to either have done a 3-year retreat, or you had to be a monastic practitioner, or you had to get permission to attend he taught the Nangjang, which is an important text from Dunjum Lingpa on the view of Trekcho. So some people, I think Rinpoche, I think the Lama told me maybe, I don't know the numbers, under 100 people were allowed to attend that. And the Lama who was telling me the story, was allowed to attend that part. So they would receive the teachings and everyone was practicing. And he said the level of faith was so strong that people just got more and more into it and started to, several people ordained and other kinds of stuff that you just don't hear about so much, like in our modern world. Most people are, you understand. that section ended, and Rinpoche was going to teach the most advanced form of Dzogchen meditation, which is called Togal. And that was very restricted. Maybe, I don't know, a much smaller number were allowed to go. And you had, in order to attend, you either had to have done a 3-year retreat in the past and were already a student of Rinpoche that he gave permission to, or you had to say, I'm going to do a 3-year retreat immediately after the teachings. And all these people vowed they were going to stay there. And so they sent word back to their families in Ladakh that they were going to stay there. And like something like 20 people just said, I'm going to retreat immediately. And the Lama who was telling me the story was so moved, he got tears in his eyes. He's like, the Dharma is still alive. People like, they're up there right now. This is just a couple months ago. They're up there right now, practicing in strict retreat for 3 years. I thought it was so amazing. The Lama who told me the story wasn't permitted to go. He wasn't ready to enter a 3-year retreat, but something like 60 or 70 people were. So they're all up there at the monastery, where Rinpoche very generously said he would support them, which is very unusual. In the Tibetan world, usually you have to provide your own supplies, just like Milarepa, right? And the Dharma is still happening. The Lama told me that when he was a monk there were 5 monks. There was Rinpoche and 5 monks, and now there are 500. 350 monks and 150 nuns. And they're up there doing nothing but practice, which I thought was about the best thing I've ever heard in my life. So for those of you who have faith in the Vajrayana, there's nothing to worry about. There are still great masters, and they are still sharing the inmost essence of the Dharma in places where there are not ordinary human habitations of cities, but in the real mountain retreat. So anyway, that was my experience in Nepal this time. I was feeling very moved and very, I don't know, I'm reminded of seeing Tsoknyi Rinpoche, another son of Togal Origin. Must have been in the 90s. It was a long time ago. And I asked him what he was up to. And he said he was on his way to Tibet to see Adi Rinpoche, a teacher of mine also. And I said, Rinpoche, why are you going? And he said, battery recharge. I thought that was pretty cool. And I know exactly how it feels, because I felt like I came back from Nepal and my spiritual battery had been recharged to some degree, whatever is possible for an ordinary person like myself. But it was pretty cool. And Kathmandu can do that. And it's not that far, and it's not very expensive. And I encourage all of you out there who have even the slightest interest to make an aspiration right now. May I spend time in Nepal? It's a beautiful place. The people are sweet. Food is good. It's not nearly as easy to get sick as it used to be. And it's full of blessings. Yeah, that's about a little bit about Nepal. I could go on for hours about other stories, but that was my most recent trip. It was very cool.
What it reminds me of is I have this kind of fascination with, I don't know what the word for it is, but there's like a spirit of place, or a culture that really shifts everything. And Vajrayana in so many ways is about that, right? Like entering into a different universe, even no matter where you are. And through these like aspirations, prayers, connections to physical landmarks and places, we can kind of step into a different universe that always exists on the same level or plane that we are in currently. And we're working on this project together to try to spread stupas that can benefit beings, particularly in the year 2030, which is said to have some astrological difficulties, which we will talk about on our next podcast. But I want to let everybody know about it now, that you can go to futurealchemy.com or Yedharma, YEDHARMA.com. And there are tiny little stupas that Joe has made that have the conditions that are designated by Guru Rinpoche to help with these situations that might come in Iron Dog year. And so what I see is this connection between this view of a materialistic view. We can have like a materialistic view of the universe, that things are going in the way they're going to go according to physics, and very kind of clunky. We can get into a subtler mindset, this Vajrayana view, where there's kind of a war between energies in some ways, or a purified way of looking at things, and a way of resisting that. And so I just see the magic of a place like Nepal can really bring out that view in a way that's so strong. Like for as practitioners in the West, it can really be hard to have that much faith because it's not in the air. And so these connecting to these stories and prophecies and building stupas or placing stupas and praying to them and making aspirations, this helps us connect. So even if we can't recharge our battery by going to Nepal, we can aspire to go to Nepal, and we can put a stupa in our own little corner of the woods and make our own little Nepal wherever we are. Um,
That's
and I
right.
think it's really powerful.
No, I think that's beautifully said. You're absolutely right. I mean, the hallmark of Vajrayana is pure perception. And that has to do with our perception of the outer world and also our perception of our own inner world. And as we align our outer world, whether it's, Tonkas like you have, like I have, and pictures of the Bayonne in Cambodia, whatever, our own little stupas and statues and all this kind of business, uh, it arranges the outside world such that when we see out, we actually realize inwardly the the purity of our own experience. And that's what Vajrayana is really about. So of course we arrange our little world, and the Stupa project, which we can talk about in the next podcast in more detail, and we talked about it briefly once before, is about that too, blessing the environment with the causes and conditions that bring about, for those who know about it and also those who don't, bring about an alignment of our inner reality with the outer world, such that pure perception becomes possible. And through pure perception, or as a connection with pure perception, whether it's not a 1-2 thing, it's simultaneously arising, then your own meditative experience can deepen. And that's what we have to do. And it is true that it is easier when you're in an environment with lots of monks and people doing practice to feel like, I want to meditate. Well, if you live in Seattle or you live in Denver, you maybe don't feel that. So it's kind of the one of the jobs, I suppose, of practitioners to try to bless or arrange the outer world in such a way that even those who do not have such an obvious connection to these teachings can start to see the sacred in their own experience. And that's what Vajrayana has always been about and what it's about now. So yeah, very well said.
And there's this part of our mind that is always aware of this, right? So like I know I have Sakya Monastery in Seattle and Keeling Rinpoche's temple on Whidbey Island, that these are like the sacred places in my land. And since I started placing some of these stupas, part of my mind is aware that these are now out there, and it affects how I see Washington, right? Like I am starting to feel, I feel that effect obviously from these great lamas already here, but now I can play some small role of even more. And even if it does nothing for anybody else, even if you didn't have faith in that, which I do have faith in that, but even if I didn't, at least for myself, I start to feel like I'm in a more sacred place, and that benefits me and my practice at the very least.
And when you feel like you're in a sacred environment, you act in accord with that. And your actions, people are picking up on that, and then they pick up on it and do that way too. And you can see it if you go to a special place like Lhasa, or in this case, if you go to around the Bodha Stupa, there are tourists there from all over the world. You see them every single day with their tour guides, and the tour guides explaining about prostrations or lighting lamps or whatever. And you can see the energy of the people shifting simply from being in the environment. So of course we have to try to do this in the US and in Europe and in Australia and South America, wherever we can, in order that that which is sort of behind our conceptual mind can come to the fore, a more complete vision of reality that's a little bit more healthy, perhaps.
Yeah, and really, like, what makes something sacred other than people's practice? I mean, really, through history, like, we can just look at these places where great masters have been, and that's what makes those places sacred. So of course, through our own practice, we can benefit beings in a real way. And that's really like the fun and magic of Vajrayana, is that you're not just thinking about yourself, you're thinking about how you can actually sacralize the world for others, and it can really have benefit.
Beautiful.
All right. Well, thank you so much, everybody, for listening. I hope you've enjoyed our little trip to Nepal. On our next podcast, we will be talking about the prophecies around the Iron Dog year. I know this is something people have had a lot of questions about or curious about, so we'll kind of with our limited knowledge, talk a little bit about what that is and what we can do to help bring benefit and prevent any difficulties that might happen with that. So until next time, thank you very much. Please like and subscribe for the algorithm. Thanks.
Thank you, Damien.